Howdy y'all, Where Gamer here, and we're coming at you with a prophecy tier list. Today we're going to be doing the leaders and the units. We're going to be talking about the leaders of the game and all the individual characters that you can place down beside them. Tomorrow I'll be posting another tier list where we're going to break down the traits that you place onto your units and the items that you can place onto your units. We'll be doing that one tomorrow. But for today we're going to start with the leaders. So let's just jump right on in and let's start talking about the leaders. First off, this game, just so everyone knows, Prophecy is now live on Steam. You no longer need a key to get the game, so go download it on Steam and come play with me. Come check me out at twitch.tv/TheWhereGamer. We play this game all the time, and you can see how my tier list has grown in my stream, as this is ever-changing, as this company is doing a great job of patching the game to make it better and better and fixing any balancing issues. But I want to talk about how things fit today. After we did have a 10K practice tournament today that I placed third in, they're having the first 10K tournament this weekend for the people that have qualified for it. And I believe this will be the tier list going into the 10K tournament that we're going to see everyone focus on. All the top players, I believe, are going to focus on this. So I'm going to start by seeding the board for the leaders, and then we're going to go down it and we're going to talk about each one. All right, so let me seed it real quick. I believe Hera is going to fit somewhere between A and B+. Athena is going to be somewhere up here. Susanoo is going to be somewhere up here. Thanatos is probably going to be somewhere down here. Poseidon's going to be up here. Thor somewhere in here. Zeus somewhere in here. Bologna somewhere up here. All right, let's start here, and we're going to start moving things around. First off, up in S tier, Susanoo and Athena, both absolutely the top two leaders in the game right now. With them changing their passives, with Susanoo's new passive, 40% increased attack speed per round, and that's for every single unit on the board, plus his ult now not being bugged to where it works properly. It also casts quicker. All of these changes make Susanoo a top leader. So many of the traits work well with Susanoo. Things that apply on abilities work well with Susanoo because his ult is a massive typhoon that hits the entire field. Traits that work well on attacks work well with Susanoo because attack speed is incredibly high. Things that increase your damage are good on Susanoo because he has high base damage. Susanoo is by far the top leader in the game right now, in my opinion. Followed closely behind by Athena. Athena no longer being bugged is incredible because now she actually teleports to all of the proper people, giving them immunity. Plus, her healing of nearby allies has increased from 2% to 4%, so she is constantly ticking and keeping your team alive to keep them going longer into the fights. Coming up third on the list is where the argument begins. A lot of people will say Poseidon is still third. I tend to agree with this. I believe Poseidon works very well with so many traits in a way that Zeus, for example, cannot. Poseidon uses a lot of traits effectively. He applies his Kraken basically to the entire field. It has a 2-second stun, which they brought down from 4. It's still bugged right now, but they're going to be fixing it, so we're going to call it a 2-second stun because they're going to be fixing that. They also fixed a bug that, in my opinion, was Poseidon's biggest thing, where Opportunist was being procced off of his Kraken. So he was Krakening, stunning everybody, and he was getting extra damage on top of his Kraken because of the Opportunist. Now that no longer applies. They have to be pre-CC'd before that Opportunist goes off, and I think that change is actually the biggest change for Poseidon. I still put Poseidon somewhere around my number 3 mark as well. Bologna, I do believe Bologna is probably the 4th best in the game, especially because in tournaments and in casual ranked play, Bologna is one of the easiest characters in the game to get to top 4. Because she works so well with the weaker units that if you have Bologna and you're facing almost any other leader early in the game, you're immediately at an advantage because of her passive affecting only uncommon, common, uncommon, and rare, I believe it is. Common, uncommon, and rare units. You're instantly in an advantage with Bologna. So you're able to come out there, have a even fight with someone else, but you're ahead just because you're Bologna. So Bologna is super effective at getting top 4. Now we're going to get into the grid of it here. I want to move these down a little bit. I feel like Thanatos is definitely somewhere near the bottom with Hera, and probably with Zeus and Loki definitely belong in A. I think I want to bring Thor down, I believe. And then we're going to bring... Yeah, I like this right here. I actually don't feel like anyone is B. In the A tier, Zeus is one of these characters. No matter what they do to him, unless they make some major changes, he comes in 1st or he comes in 8th. He works very well with a lot of traits. but he has to get those traits. If your RNG is bad loading into the game, you typically know how Zeus is going to do going into the game as soon as you see the traits list. If you see things like Void, Silence, Astral, any mana gain like Resourceful, Spirit, or Wisdom, Zeus is probably going to have a pretty good time, and it's going to be really hard to deal with him. His main one, in my opinion, is probably Silence, because his ult hits everyone on the field no matter what. You can't avoid it, you can't dodge it. You can mitigate the damage, but you get hit by it. So you want those on-hit effects of abilities to be on Zeus, and you can just run through the team. But the downside to Zeus, and the reason he can't be higher than A, is because if you don't get these traits, Zeus loses. End of story. Odin. Odin is an extreme. We're going to talk about Odin and Loki together because they do very similar things, but opposites, if this makes any sense. Odin and Loki run the early game, kind of the way Bologna does, but in a different way. Bologna runs the early game because she boosts her entire team because you have lower tier characters. Odin and Loki run the early game because they single-handedly do it. Odin's ultimate with his shield goes off so often and is so potent that in the first 5 to 7 rounds of the game, Odin is almost impossible to kill if you're at least even with your opponent as far as level and units on the field. Odin is very difficult to deal with in the early game because you can't kill him. And if you place him in the front line and your opponent doesn't have something to get past him, to go into your back line to where you can get to a point in the round where you have 4 characters alive and all your opponent has left is Odin, you won't kill him. He's too tanky with his shield. Plus, he makes all of the units around him tankier with his passive, so Odin can run the early game. Loki does the exact same thing, but not through staying tanky. He single-handedly kills your entire team. In the first 5 to 7 rounds, it's very hard to lose a round as Loki if you're starting out the round even, as far as levels, units on the field, etc., etc. It's very hard to get behind as Loki unless you do it to yourself. Because Loki, with his ultimate, he essentially completely takes one character off the board every time he ults. And if you have any kind of extended fight, he's going to ult 2, maybe 3 times, and that's just one character going off the board every time to put his team at a huge advantage. Loki runs the early game on his own. Unless your RNG is just incredibly bad, you should be going into the stages where you're getting 7, 8, 9 characters on the board. You should be in the top 2 or 3 people as far as health remaining. That's when Loki starts to fall off, and that's the reason he's not higher than this, is because he's kind of very similar to Bologna in the fact that he can make top 4 very easily. But winning the game with Loki is hard without the proper comp behind him, kind of like Zeus. So Loki, to me, is that middle ground between Bologna and Zeus, where he makes top 4, but he's really hard to win the game with unless you get the right comp, just like Zeus. All right, let's jump on down to B+. Thor got a change. Thor's new passive is the start of combat. All allies gain 25% physical and magical damage for the round. So he basically boosts his entire team's damage for the round. His ultimate is also one of the highest damaging abilities in the game, where it does 900 damage in an AoE over 4 seconds. But there's the problem with his ult. His ult is very strong, but 4 seconds in a game like this, where Thor is not super tanky, is a long time to be ulting as a leader and not pumping out any more damage with your auto attacks. Unlike Athena, whose ult takes a while to get off, but the entire time you're ulting with Athena, you and another person are completely immune to damage, so you're not taking damage. It's very rare, unless you are just way ahead, that I see a Thor finish his ultimate all the way through. Usually by the time the Thor has built up enough mana to use his ultimate, he's already like half health. And then by the time his ultimate finishes channeling, you've usually killed him by then, because he has to be in the front line to deal his maximum damage. And unless you have a lot of defensive traits being applied to him, Thor dies so easily that you don't get the damage off of that incredible ultimate. Even though I do believe Thor jumped up. A couple weeks ago, I would have put Thor down here. I believe he's jumped up really high to B+. He might even be flirting with A. I think we can talk about Thor the next time I do a tier list and see if Thor has made his way up into the A list. I believe he might, so I'm going to keep my eye on Thor really closely. Hera and Thanatos. These two are by far the lowest tier characters in the game right now to me. Thanatos has seen a major change, so we're going to talk about him last. Hera's an interesting character because Hera only truly works one of 2 ways, in my opinion. Because her passive, your team heals every time a unit dies. So the best way to run Hera is with pet comp. You want to get those Arachnes, you want to get those Allplushes, you want to get those Scotties, the Artemises, all those things, get all kinds of pets out there. And every time one of those pets dies, it procs her passive and your entire team heals for, I believe it's 15% of their max health. which is huge. So a pet comp Hera is almost impossible to kill. That's why a lot of times in your games, you'll see Hera tie with people because the time runs out because Hera doesn't have the damage to kill the enemy team with her pet comp, but the enemy team can't deal with all the pets and the healing that Hera's pumping out. The problem with Hera is that she is almost 100% shut down in a multitude of ways. If you get great anti-heal, such as Void Poison, if you get Rod of Rot against her, if you get Soul, Cabrakan, Arachne now has anti-heal. There's so much anti-heal that can just shut Hera down. It's so hard to deal with. The other thing with Hera is it's very hard to win if you're tying all the time, because the right way to run Hera is a ton of pets to heal you and 2 or 3 extremely damaging characters like getting a Cuckoo or an Agni, or getting a Scotty with a Bonfire Bow, or something to pump out tons of damage. A couple hard carry characters that can win you the game while they're just being protected, almost like a protect the president style. That's the only way to truly win is Hera. And there's so many different ways to shut her down, because what if she doesn't get those Allplashes or those Scotties? What if she doesn't get these characters that cause her to function well? Then she just loses. So Hera is not strong enough on her own to carry the game, and that's a problem as a leader. As a leader, you want that person's ability to either be affecting your team so well, such as Bologna, that your team carries you through, or you want someone like Susanoo who's just going to win it on his own regardless of what his team does. So that's why Hera, I believe, is B+. I actually think Hera, now that I'm talking about her and looking at Thor, I'm actually moving Hera to the bottom. I believe Hera is the worst leader in the game right now, because the only way to win with her is a very specific, very acute way of doing it. And I know you're like, Corey, but didn't you say that about Zeus? Yes. But with Hera, if you get her perfect traits and perfect comp, you might win. With Zeus, if you get those perfect traits and that perfect comp, you will win. That's just how it works. So Hera's is in the B tier. Thanatos got a change. Thanatos, let's talk about the way he used to work. Used to, his passive gave him tons of lifesteal and allowed him as Thanatos to be the cog behind your entire team. You put down traits, you put down units to boost your Thanatos when you're running a Thanatos comp, because he ults so often, he healed so much, and he dealt so much damage that you just wanted your Thanatos to win you the game. When this was Thanatos, he was probably a top 2 leader in the entire game. Now Thanatos has dropped down dramatically, because now that lifesteal is not being applied to him, it's being applied to his entire team, including him, but it's now functioning differently. And it's not effective. Lifesteal is one of the weaker traits, one of the weaker abilities that you can have on units in this game now. Because the way it works, healing is way more powerful than lifesteal. So why would you go lifesteal when you have healing? There's so many anti-heal ways in the game. Just like I was talking about with Hera, you can shut down healing very easily. So now Thanatos is functioning so differently that he's not just running the game by himself, and the ability that he's giving his units on the field is so much weaker than everyone else's abilities they're giving their units, that he just can't be high enough on, almost anybody he goes against, they do it better. Loki does what Thanatos wants better. Susanoo does what Thanatos wants better. Thor does what Thanatos wants better. But Thanatos, I still have to put him above Hera. I think he's B+. I don't think he's garbage. Now, are my 2 characters I'm probably going to have outside of my top 8 that I don't use be Hera and Thanatos? Probably. But do I think you can run Thanatos? Absolutely. He's not garbage. He can be ran and he can win. Just understand, you are putting yourself more than likely at a disadvantage because of this. So there's my leaders tier list, guys. I don't believe anyone is S+ anymore. A couple weeks ago, I would have put Poseidon S+. I think I used to think he was unstoppable. You couldn't beat him. I don't think anybody's S+ anymore. I don't think anybody's so garbage that they belong in C tier where you can't use them. I believe every leader in this game can be played, be used, and win games. Some of them are just easier than others. So that's what I think about your leaders, guys. That's my tier list. I hope you like it. Drop comments down below what you think should be different about this, and explain to me why you think it should be different. If you think Thanatos is S+, the best character in the game, I want to hear why. Not just I think he is. I want to know why. If you think Thor is one of the best characters in the game, I want to know why. If you think Susanoo is incredibly weak, he doesn't belong to be an S, tell me why. Let's talk about units, guys. That's the leaders tier list. One last look. Units. All right, here's the plan on units. We're going to run through units from common up. We're going to go by their rating. You know, gray, green, blue, purple, orange. We're going to run all the way through it, okay? We're going to start with the common characters, okay? So with your common characters, we'll just run through here. Common, on her. On her, I believe to be somewhere around B+. So on her does decent damage and has decent attack speed. But if you compare his traits completely even to some of the other common characters, such as Chernabog and such as even Hebo, for example, they are so common as far as protections, attack speed, and damage that on her can get the job done, but the others do it better because of their ultimates. On her, ults and does decent damage and stuns the furthest character away from him, which is great. A stun is a fantastic thing in this game, but it's single target damage, and he needs 100 mana to cast when tons of these other ones, like Chernabog, needs 70, Hebo needs 50, etc., etc., etc. That on her is a very hard character to fit into your comp early because his ultimate takes so long to cast, and he doesn't do more damage or attack speed or things like that than some of the other commons do. Bakasura. I think Bakasura, being the only common assassin, is wildly underrated. I think you would see a lot of people put Bakasura in B+ or B. I think Bakasura is balanced. I think Bakasura has good attack speed. It's some of the highest in the commons, outside of course, Scotty, who has the highest in the game outside of Set. He does good damage, and he uses items and traits extremely well. There are so many items and so many traits that Bakasura uses extremely well, especially in the early game when you consider you only have 2, 3, 4 units down. Having a character like Bakasura who can go to the backline and pump damage into the mages because they don't have enough characters to defend the front and backline with tanks is extremely valuable in the early game. Most of the time, you're not going to be carrying Bakasura to your late game, but in the early game, I think that backline dive is extremely valuable, and his damage and attack speed are very good. All right, next one. Hebo. We'll talk about Hebo. I think Hebo is also A. No, actually A+. Hebo's A+. Let's talk about these two in the same light. Hebo and Hades. Hebo is A+, Hades is A. Why? They're both mages. They both do well in the early game. I do think both of these characters in the early game you are looking to get down on your field. Now, what do they do differently? Hades' ult is a tick over time, which is not super effective in the early game where the fights are not very extended. The fights in the early game end very quickly. They rely on burst damage and getting characters off the field as quick as possible. Usually, whoever has the first character die in an early, let's say, pre-7 round fight is the person that loses, because you have now drastically dropped that player's DPS so much that because they're down a unit compared to you that they just can't keep up at that point. Hades' tick does not apply any CC. It does not burst them down. But why is Hades A? Hades can be carried all the way to the late game if you get him 5-star, because he applies items so well. If I see Hades Soul Cleaver on my round 1 screen, I am jumping for joy because I know I'm making top 4. Because Hades applies items so well. If you see Hades Rod of Rot, if you see Hades and anything that silences, anything that disarms, these are great items to put on Hades because he applies it to a wide range of people so well. That's why Hades is A. Hebo is A+, because of all those reasons I just said. Apply those to Hebo, except he has single target ult damage that is on a 50 mana cooldown, and it basically blows someone up and knocks them up and takes them out of the field for about a second and a half. So Hebo CCs you and blows you up. That's why Hebo is extremely good in the early game. And he works extremely well with the other half of the items that do single target damage, such as increased magical power. You can even get tanky Hebo, and that's fine because he does so much damage that keep him alive, and his mana cost is so low that he will blow the other team up. All right, moving on. That's your mages. I prefer Hebo over Hades, but I'm not upset over taking a Hades early. Carcadon. I think Carcadon is B. Carcadon's ult is extremely ineffective. It knocks someone up, but he is a tank who has single target damage, who has single target ultimate, and does not do that much damage, and he's not even tankier than the other units. Carcadon, the only reason I put Carcadon in B and not C is because no one goes for Carcadon. And it's also the reason in this game I find it very difficult to say that a character is unplayable. Is because if a character is worse than the others, such as Carcadon, such as, let's say, Dryad, which we'll get to that in a second, it's hard to say a character is not viable in a game like this, where if everyone else is ignoring that character, you can easily and quickly get that character to 5-star, which instantly puts you ahead. I can't tell you the strategies I've seen where people have consistently made top 4 or top 2 because they rushed Carcadon to level 5, and they have Carcadon 5-star at like round 7. No one else even focused Carcadon, and now they have a 2200 health Carcadon standing in the front line, dealing damage, who never dies. So that is an effective strat. But Carcadon, when comparing him, apples to apples against his counterparts, single target damage, it's not enough CC, he's not tanky enough, he's definitely down here at the bottom. All right, we got Chalk. I find Chalk to be A. I think Chalk is tanky. I think Chalk does good damage. And I think Chalk, just like Hades, applies items well. Once again, if I see Chalk level 1 and any item that applies on ability effects, I'm happy with Chalk. He's got an area. See, this is what Carcadon is missing. Carcadon and Chalk are incredibly similar in the things they do, except for the ultimate. Where Carcadon only hits one person, Chalk hits an entire area around him. And that is what makes Chalk the difference. He's a tank that you can put up front and apply ability damage with items. And that is a extremely valuable thing in this game right now, especially with things like Silence, Void, all the area ability damaging items. It's great on Chalk, so I find Chalk to be A. Any other? We got Ymir. I find Ymir to be probably B+. The freeze is extremely good, and it completely takes people out of the game for, I believe it's 3 seconds. I think it's 3 seconds how long his freeze lasts. But the problem with Ymir's freeze is he's usually freezing frontliners. He's freezing tanks, which early in the game when you're going to be using Ymir is not the greatest thing because the tanks are typically there just to soak up damage. Yes, you're stopping their DPS, but you're also piling all of your DPS into that tank, which is what your opponent wants. Ymir's attack speed is too slow. He doesn't apply any effective items nearly as well, because why would you want to disarm with Ymir's freeze when they're already frozen? So that's a wasted thing. Why would you want to silence with Ymir's freeze when they're already frozen? That's a wasted thing. So he does not apply things as well as, say, Chalk does, but the freeze is extremely potent in the early game, so he can be placed. Let's say you're staring down a Carcadon Ymir, you're going to take Ymir. All right. Other commons. We got Scotty. I find Scotty to be S. Scotty applies so many things extremely well. Her attack speed is the highest in the game outside of Set at 1.3. She applies so many items and so many traits extremely well. If you can get Ice, if you can get Thunder, if you can increase her attack speed even more with Haste and then get Ice or Thunder, even Ether, which is not a fantastic trait, again, spoiler for tomorrow's video, works extremely well on Scotty because her attack speed is so high. You're not picking up Scotty to do damage. Scotty does no damage. I think her base attack damage is 23. You're tickling them. You're doing it for the on-hit effects. You actually don't want Scotty to ult and drop Calder because that slows down her DPS with the on-hit effects because she's stopping her auto attack and releasing the dog, which is bad for Scotty. You want all the items like Bonfire Bow, Furious Axe, things like this that burn your opponent down while going to her strength, which is her attack speed. You don't care about her base damage. So things like crit and things like fire don't work well on Scotty. You want to increase what she's good at. And because she applies all these things so extremely well, I have taken 1-star Scotties all the way to the end before. And they have been my top damage dealers because you don't care how much damage she's doing with her auto. It's about applying those on-hit effects, and she does it better than anybody. Because Set has a higher attack speed, but Scotty does it better because she's ranged. Set has to be up and in their face, while Scotty can sit in the back line and be protected and just sling it at them all day long. All right, any more comments? Don't believe so. Yeah, there's one more, I believe. One more comment, I believe. Yep, all right, Chernabog. I think Chernabog is A+. Chernabog is another one that I will take to the late game. His attack speed and his damage are very okay. He is the character that I compare the most to on her because he has the exact same attack speed, but he does more damage. He takes 70 mana to cast his ult. He takes 100 mana. And Chernabog's ult is incredible because it does true damage. And it goes through Athena ult. Cherno is the perfect counter to Athena because it ignores immunities. It ignores Divine Intervention. It ignores Impenetrable Helm. It ignores all immunities. And his ult is the perfect counter to these things. He also goes up in the air, gains evasion. He aggro drops. Cherno is wonderful for this. He is a character that, again, at 1-star, I will take to the late game if I have to. He is extremely powerful, and he does well with on-hit effects. He does well with abilities. Cherno is a character that if I see him early, I'm extremely happy. Depending on what leader I'm running, I will sometimes even run Cherno over Scotty because I think Cherno will do better for me, whereas Scotty requires items and traits to get online. All right, that does it, I believe, for the commons. No, we got one more. We missed one. We got Minotaur. Where is Minotaur? There he is, Minotaur. I find Minotaur also to be, I'm lying. I find Minotaur to be S. Minotaur, I believe, is S. His attack speed for a tank is extremely high. I think it's like 0.7 or 0.66. I think it's 0.7. However, he has the highest auto attack damage in the game, even higher than Izanami base. I believe his first auto attack does like 140 damage or something like that. Plus, he's extremely tanky. Plus, even though his ult is single target, he applies so many things extremely well. Even if I put a void on him, I'm fine with that because he's smacking people, and as soon as he hits somebody with his ult, that person dies. Because he does a lot of damage with his ult, then the void ticks them, and they just die. You can build him tanky, you can build him damagey. I have built Minotaur with fire haste before and let him swing. I have put Divine Intervention on Minotaur and let him swing. In the early game, this man can win you the first 7 rounds if you build him correctly and do it right. I love Minotaur, and if I see Minotaur and Scotty, I'm usually putting Minotaur down. Because Minotaur doesn't require anything to be good. He's just good. Scotty requires certain items and certain traits. Minotaur, you just put down and win. That is your commons. Now, let's go to the uncommons. Okay? We will start with Apollo. I tend to find Apollo to be somewhere skirting between A and A+. I'm going to put him in A, specifically because I want to talk about another character alongside Apollo. Where is Jing Wei? I find Apollo and Jing Wei to be extremely comparable right now. I find Apollo to do damage better. If I can get things like fire, some attack damage items, such as Great Sword to give him extra damage, anything like that with fire, and then I can give him something like, let's say, an agility to proc on other people, I'm usually happy with these things. Or a judgment, anything like that. I'm usually happy with these things on Apollo. Because Apollo has such a high attack speed in his ult that he does not require more attack speed or more attack speed items to make him good. Even though Divine Intervention, for example, works extremely well on him, that's the only example I would argue. Apollo wants more damage because his attack speed is already so high that he can just pump it out. Now, Jing Wei does a very similar thing to Apollo, but the reason Jing Wei is A+ is because with her ultimate, she aggro drops. I love seeing Jing Wei, and I love leveling Jing Wei. Because if I can get Jing Wei leveled and starred up and get her more health, I will put her in the backline as my assassin drawer, as my pseudo tank in the backline. Because people will go and attack her, and her mana to ult is only 40, so she gets it off extremely quickly, that she will aggro drop and waste those characters' times, and she stays alive longer than almost anyone in the game. You could have her and a full team of tanks. There's a high likelihood that Jing Wei will be your last character alive because her aggro drop happens so often that she's getting off way more DPS than anyone who could possibly attack her. I've seen Jing Wei with 10% health take down 3 people with 100% health because she's either healing and life-stealing, and she's aggro dropping, or she's just pumping out so much damage and aggro dropping so much that she just kills them quicker than they kill her. I love seeing Jing Wei early, but if I see Apollo, I'm usually not very upset. Alright, next, I want to talk about Kali. Kali is your baseline assassin that you see after Bakasura. Kali does different things than Bakasura, though, as she is mostly focused around her abilities. Her ability, she spins around really fast like a top, and she hits everybody around her kind of like in a circular, not really a cone, but all the way around her, kind of the way Chalk does. And she applies certain traits very well, such as, it's kind of like a mage, such as silence, such as void, things like that. You don't want things like haste fire on her, haste thunder. You don't want these things on Kali. You want Kali getting her ult off and applying traits. However, Kali can do good damage with her autos if you get her leveled. I have seen 5-star Kalis at round 10 take people all the way to the end because they run the game and dive that backline so well. The problem with Kali is that she's extremely squishy, and if she doesn't get her ult off, it's useless. And very similar to how Thor works as a leader, her ult takes a long time to cast, and she stops auto-attacking while casting this ult. So her DPS is slowed down right there. And a lot of times, I will see Kali's ult, start the ult, and a second into ulting die because they're so squishy. That's why I don't find Kali higher than this. Okay. Let's talk about Centurion. I love Centurion. I think that people were extremely surprised when the last patch came out where you could see the effects on the people around you of who was getting Centurion's ult. I think most people saw Centurion and they thought only the people standing right beside him and hugging him were the ones receiving his ult protections, which is just not true. Now that we've seen all the people that are getting his ult protections with the visual in the game now, people are realizing that this thing has a very broad reach, and if you just plop a Centurion in the center of your comp and let him ult very quickly with things like Wisdom, Resourceful, or even put the Mana Potion on him or something like that, you immediately basically start the game up 75 prots all over the board, and it's very, very hard to kill when you have a Centurion ulting like that. So when I see a Centurion, he is the perfect early game tank. I don't particularly like to take Centurions late into the game if I can. I like to replace them with other tanks such as Guan Yu or something later, just because those prots aren't as significant later in the game. But Centurion also works very well with traits, such as Metallic works extremely well when you have a Centurion on your team. So obviously, dependent on your comp, Centurion can be taken to the late game, but I love seeing a Centurion early in the game. All right, now we're going to talk about Dryad, or the pseudo Hell. Really the only base healer in the game. Like, I know we have Trent, but she's nothing but a hardcore healer. I put her in B. Now, she can be used, and again, this is a character that gets ignored, so getting her to 5 stars is not extremely difficult. I actually think things like Immunity Helm and Divine Intervention actually work very well on Dryad because she stays alive longer and heals your team more. The problem with Dryad is the same problem I have with Hera as a leader. There is so much anti-heal in this game and so many ways to counter her that if you take away her healing, she does nothing. She is not even a trait bot at that point because her auto attacks do nothing. The traits you're putting on her are usually to make her heal more, which means her traits are next to useless. So Dryad is so easily counterable that it's very rare that you want to go into a Dryad unless there's no anti-heal in the game, but even then you have to worry about Cabrakans, Arachnes, Souls, all these things. So Dryad is a very hard character to build into. Let's talk about... there's 3 more. Okay. Let's talk about Sun Wukong. I actually find Sun Wu to be B+. I think Sun Wu is under the point of balance because of his ultimate. Sun Wu is a character that you can put traits on and they work well with him. You can make him extremely tanky. You want tank traits on him typically. You want him to stay alive and just be a damage absorber. And it's even better for him because his ultimate takes him out of the field of play, allows him to heal up and come right back down to basically full health, which is a great thing. Except the man does next to no damage. When he goes up in his ultimate, yes, he stays alive and comes back down, but he's no longer targetable, so he drops that aggro, and then the enemy team's units run right past your Sun Wu and kill your backline. And when Sun Wu lands, he doesn't do enough damage to typically matter. The only time I like having Sun Wu is if I can get him extremely early and leveled up so that he can hopefully survive long enough into the game that it's just him versus one other person, and then he typically wins the 1v1 because he heals himself. That's about the only time I want to see Sun Wu, but he doesn't apply traits extremely well, so I don't love getting Sun Wu in my game. Okay, let's talk about Hachiman. I find Hachiman to be B+. Now, his flag coming down and applying CC immunity to everybody around him is extremely valuable. Very similar to Almatrazee. I love getting Hachiman if I don't need him to be a damage dealer. If I basically just need him for the CC immunity, that is when I love Hachiman. If I am playing against a Zeus who's getting his perfect traits, if he's got the silences, specifically silence, if I'm playing against a silence heavy comp, I will run Hachiman just for that flag so that he can CC immune my entire team. And I will put CC immune boots on him to make sure that he can apply that CC immunity to other people. Outside of those situations, I find that Hachiman does not apply items as well as other hunters. He does not do as much damage as other hunters. And he does not have a damaging ult because his ult gives CC immunity, that he's not killing people. You don't want him to be your main DPS. You want him to be a support character who's basically there for his ultimate, who can apply damage and be a trait bot at the same time. So if I see Hachi, Jing Wei, and Apollo, I'm always looking for Jing Wei and Apollo first, unless I'm playing CC heavy or silence heavy comps. Okay, let's talk about Sobek. Sobek's S. I believe Sobek is one of the best characters in the game. Sobek works extremely well with anything that allows him to ult, because his ult, again, is on such a small mana cooldown that he's ulting constantly. Plus, he's a great tank. Plus, he can displace people, which is a huge ability in this game. Being able to take that backline hunter or that backline mage and throw them across the field right into the center of your team, who can just turn and blow him up, is a huge ability to have in this game. Plus, his ultimate does massive damage. Late game 1v1s, early game 1v1s, like level 4, 5, 6, round 4, 5, 6, Sobek is very hard to beat in a 1v1 because he ults you, he displaces you, he does tons of damage, and then he ults you again. Any mana gain on him, plus like a devotion to heal your team, makes a Sobek on your team so extremely valuable. I love seeing Sobek when he comes into my games. I believe there's one more. Yep, one more. The final one is Arachne. I think Arachne is slept on. I think Arachne is probably, she's between A and A+. It's hard to put her up here in A+, but I think I do, because when I see an Arachne, I get extremely happy. The anti-heal on Arachne is so effective when there's like 4 healing traits in the game, so many characters heal, so many leaders heal, that the anti-heal added to Arachne, I think, bumped her from A to A+. She used to be an A, but I think the anti-heal on Arachne moved her up to A+. But the main reason I love seeing Arachne on my team is because of the items that you can put on Arachne that work so well with her. Things such as Bladed Web, Polymorph Tome, all these things that when your people hit the enemy, or when your team gets hit, apply so well with Arachne, because those babies from her ultimate get that item's ability, that being able to throw those babies out there all over the place and apply these items is Arachne's biggest strength. When I see an Arachne, if there's any of them left that I think I can get her starred, she is the first character I will put down. If I see Arachne and Jing Wei, I will typically go Arachne just because of how many uses I have out of her. Arachne has so many utility ways to be used that you're not narrowed into one specific way, that I think Arachne helps any comp she's on. All right. That does it for the uncommons. Let's talk about the rares. And while we're on pet builds, let's go ahead and talk about Opwash. I think Opwash is A. I think Opwash fits very specific things, but I do think he can fit onto any comp, and that's why I think he's A. Because when his zombies die and they disarm everybody, that is an extremely good thing to have. I think he does good damage as a mage with his zombies. But the thing with Opwash is, he's not going to carry your team. He is not super tanky. His zombies don't do enough damage, kind of like the way Arachne's do, that it's as effective. But Opwash, in the right situations where you're trying to disarm a hunter comp, where you have Opwash with a Hera, where you have Opwash with like Hades' Hot Hands, or anything like that, is so effective. A Divine Intervention Opwash is incredible, because every time those zombies die, they come back, which is also incredible. But I think Opwash requires so many specific things to make him incredible, it makes him balanced. Because without these specific things, he just does okay on your team. All right, let's talk about Trent. I think Trent is somewhere between B+ and A. I'm going to put him in B+, mostly because, just like Dryad, anti-heal counters him extremely well. But the positive thing about Dryad compared to Trent, and why Tree is above Dryad, is he's a tank. At the end of the day, even if he's countered completely by anti-heal, by ice, by anything that shuts him down, stops him from ulting, he's still in the front line soaking up damage, and that is a much more useful thing to have than a Dryad in the back line being countered and doing nothing. So that's the only reason I think Trent belongs here. All right. Next, let's talk about Doji. Doji, I find to be somewhere between A and A+. I think she actually, now that I actually like Doji in A+. I was thinking A, but I like Doji in A+, because I like her better than Kali. Doji is another character very similar to Scotty that you don't want to ult. She has such high attack damage, not attack speed like Scotty, that if you put the right damage items on her, and her attack speed is decent at 1, that if you can get things like fire on her, mixed with maybe something defensive to keep her alive, like an endurance or something to keep her alive, plus if you can put something on her to give her damage, like a greatsword, you are increasing her damage so much that she can dive the backline, and with 2 swaps, she can kill a mage. If you get any stars on her, she can one-shot mages. So I love that on Doji. Plus, the ultimate, even though you don't want her ulting, if she's in a bad situation, she ults and aggro drops. And aggro drops are so extremely powerful in this game that I think that boosts Doji up to A+. All right, let's talk about Camazotz. I think Camazotz is S. I think that the nerf to his silence did affect him. Pre-nerf Camazotz, I thought was S+. Pre-nerf Camazotz was S+, absolutely. I think his nerfs has brought him down into S. I find Camazotz to be extremely useful. I think he has a place, and if I see any Camazotz on the board, I'm usually going for him. Because silencing the enemy team in the area around his ultimate is so powerful, and his ultimate is on such a short cooldown, and he can be built almost any way. If you want to go damage Camazotz, you can do it. If you want to go attack speed Camazotz, you can do it, because he aggro drops so often to use his ultimate to silence that he stays alive for a very long time, that you can just constantly use Camazotz ult and build him almost any way, and he will be effective. Obviously, some ways are better than others, but he's effective almost any way you put him. All right. Let's talk about, I believe, Zhong Kui. Yeah, let's talk about Zhong Kui and Ullr next. Okay. Zhong Kui. I tend to find Zhong Kui somewhere around A. I love his ultimate. Because unlike some people's ultimates who are channeled, Zhong Kui casts his ult, and then he can continue to auto-attack during his ult. And the better thing about Zhong Kui is that even after he dies, his ultimate persists on the field. Zhong Kui is one of my favorite characters early game to get any good traits on, such as Void, such as Silence, even such as Astral, because it stays around. I think these things work so effectively on Zhong that a well-built Zhong in the early game will carry you to top 2, top 3. Zhong is definitely the character looking at this A list and looking at this A+ list that I put right here. He's right in between A and A+, but I don't think that he fits better with this squad. I think he fits better here, so I'm going to keep him in A. But if there was any character in A and A+ that belongs in this middle ground, it is Zhong Kui. All right, let's talk about Soul. I find Soul to be A+. I think Soul, with her anti-heal on her ultimate, is extremely powerful in a very heal-centric game where there's healing all over the place. I believe Soul does extremely good damage. If you build her with any kind of area item, such as a silence item or a disarm item or soul cleaver, I believe that Soul does extremely well. My favorite item to put on Soul, actually, is Shrewd Baton with any kind of mana trait, such as Spirit or Resourceful, because she ults so often and hits such a large field that she can lead your team in damage all the way through to the end. I love seeing Soul early in my game. All right, let's talk about Ullr. I think Ullr's A. I think his aggro drop on his ultimate's extremely good, and I think he's one of the best characters in the game with Divine Intervention because of his passive healing him, but when it comes to hunters, I typically tend to lean the Jing Wei route more. Soul's not even a hunter, but I would rather have a Chernabog than an Ullr, but Ullr does do things extremely well. I just think other hunters do them better. Let's talk about Khepri. I actually think Khepri's S. I think Khepri is so tanky that it's almost impossible not to fit him onto any comp. I don't care if he's 1-star. He has 100 procs on magical and physical base. The man doesn't die. He revives people with his ultimate. With Clarity, he can revive 2 people. I think Khepri is an extremely strong character to just put in the front line and say, "Oh, I don't die. What you gonna do about it?" Khepri is wonderful at this. If I see Khepri, I don't care if it's late game, I will replace a 4-star for a 1-star Khepri, depending on who the character is, if I think it will benefit my team more, because Khepri does so extremely well with just staying alive in the front line. I love seeing Khepri's come into my game. 2 more. We got Izzy and Medusa. Let's talk about Medusa first. I think Medusa's A. I think Medusa... actually, no, I think Medusa's B+. I actually think Medusa's under the point of balance. I think her ultimate is fantastic. It hits a wide area of people. It applies decent traits, but it kind of does a very similar thing to Ymir, where some of the traits that are affected, such as Silence, are worthless because, like Ymir, if they're frozen, if they're stoned, what does silencing do against them? Silence does nothing because they're stoned. It does nothing. But it applies things like Void extremely well, for example. Her auto attacks are a little bit slower and hit a little bit less hard than some of the other hunters, so I don't love to build her an attack speed route. I typically only want her as an ult bot. Like, I want her ulting constantly. I will build mana items on her like crazy just to try to get her to ult. But almost every late game, I usually end up wishing I had someone who did more damage. She doesn't do the damage I think she should, and she doesn't apply enough traits effectively. And then we got Izanami. So I told everybody on stream and everything that I think people will be surprised with my Izanami. I think most people will put Izanami in B. I actually find Izanami to be B+. I think Izanami is one of those characters that has to be built perfectly. But the reason she's B+ and not B is because there's not really a counter to her, not really. And when built perfectly, she can win you the game. If you can get her with a Susanoo who gives 40% attack speed to all of his teammates, that boosts Izanami's attack speed up to like 0.8 or something like that, which is the base attack speed for a lot of hunters, which brings Izanami back to balance on attack speed. Plus, if you can get nothing but heavy fire, heavy metallic, or something like that on her and make her tanky and damagey, plus get her a good item that will go with her and make what she does even better. I have had Izanami with over 700 attack damage before, and she one-shots people. She attacks slow, but every time you see an auto attack come out, something dies. The problem with Izzy is I think the perfect comp against Izzy is any pet. Because you don't want a single auto attack of her being wasted on a pet. You want her killing people because she can. But if you protect Izzy and build her right, she can win you the game. That's why I think she's B+, not B. And I believe that does it for the rares. It does. Let's move on to the epics, the purples. All right. So starting with the epics, I want to start with Achilles. I find Achilles to be A+. I think that his execute is extremely powerful, but I find him to die extremely easily, and he also does not use almost any trait in the game well, except for make him tankier so he can ult more. Because there's no point in building mana on him because his mana is only 40, it builds so quick. There's no point in building auto attack traits on him because he auto attacks so little. There's no point in building ability hit traits on him because he ults often, but it's single target damage, and if they're below 40%, he executes them anyway, so what's the point of building those? The only thing you want on Achilles is straight defense, but he can execute an entire team one after one after one after one if you let him. I've had Achilles execute an entire team before because he ults every time he executes someone, he ults again, and he can turn a game easier than anyone. The only person in the game I think might be able to turn around where you're 2v6ing quicker might be Agni, but then Agni has a long channel time. Achilles just starts killing people one after another, so I love seeing Achilles in my game. Almatrazee. So here's the thing about Almatrazee. Very similar to the Dryad Trent argument. I think Hachiman and Almatrazee do the exact same thing, but Almatrazee does it better. She gives CC immunity. He gives CC immunity. She's a tank. He's not. Her attack speed as a fighter is actually higher than Hachiman's. Her attack speed is 1.3. So if you build Almatrazee with like a tank trait like defense and an on-hit effect trait like thunder, and then like a tank item or something, Almatrazee will frag, and she will CC your team. She will CC immune your team while doing it. So I think she just does what Hachiman does better, but I don't think she does good enough in a game to carry you to the top. Let's talk about Artemis. I think Artemis has seen a big uptick here recently now that the boar is functioning properly. Used to, the boar would run into the wall and would like freeze there and keep running and running and running, and he wouldn't start doing damage. I think Artemis has become one of my favorite characters to build Divine Intervention on because Tusky does a lot of damage. If you can get Tusky in that backline attacking the mages, then those mages die typically. Tusky has a lot of health and does a lot of damage. But with that being said, Artemis, on the other hand, does not. Damage is not super high. Attack speed is not super high. I think she finds herself in B+. I think Tusky is fine. I think they need to increase Artemis attack speed or her damage, one or the other. They need to make her more of an Izzy or more of a Jing Wei 1. All right. Let's talk about Cabrakan. I think Cabrakan is A. I think Cabrakan has a couple things going for him. He has anti-heal on his ult, which is incredible. He can't be CC'd in his ult, which is also incredible. And he applies traits extremely well because of the wide area he hits, such as Void, such as Silence, all these things we've talked about over and over and over. If you're noticing a trend here, it's about applying those traits. He does it very well. Problem with Cabrakan, he dies easily. Cabrakan is very similar to Cerberus, that he will do big damage, he will apply traits, but he dies very easily. Alright, let's talk about Chernabog. Chernabog is S. Chernabog continues to have one of the best ultimates in the game. He turns almost everybody on the enemy team into pigs for like 4 seconds. And they just can't do anything. And they're just pigs. And they stand there forever. And your team kills them. That's it. I don't want to talk about his attack speed. Don't want to talk about his damage. Don't want to talk about anything. He turns the entire enemy team into pigs. And they stand there and die. He's S. Oh, I skipped Chronos. Let's go all the way back to the uncommons, guys. I skipped Chronos. So currently Chronos has a little bug going on with him. So I'm not seeing a whole lot of play with him. But I want to place Chronos where I think he would be if he was not bugged and being played often right now. I think he's A. I think he doesn't do tons of damage, but I think he applies traits very well, very similar to someone like Hades. I think Chronos is a better Hades. But not well enough to get him up into A+. I think Chronos is nothing but a better Hades. He's ranged. He applies his ultimate to a wide variety of people all the way across the field, and he applies those traits very well. So I think Chronos does very well, but not that well. All right, continuing on. Discordia. I find Discordia to be A+. She also has one of the better ultimates in the game. Charming the enemy team and having them attack each other is amazing. I have seen Discordia ran with comps that have healing, and she ults the enemy team while your team is healing. It's not that she does tons of damage. She distracts I think Discordia with a healing comp is the best Discordia you can run, because your team takes tons of damage, right? You're about half health. Discordia ults the enemy team, and while they're all distracted fighting each other, you're killing them while using your healing traits to heal up. I think Discordia is the best complement to a healing comp you could have. All right, let's talk about Geb. I find Geb to be the Zhong Kui of A+ and S. I find Geb to be skirting this line right here between S and A+. With the right traits and the right comp around him, I think Geb shoots up into S. I have seen Geb 1v5 with Soul Cleaver before, because he stuns the whole enemy team. He kills everybody with the Soul Cleaver, plus his ultimate does tons of damage. The problem with Geb is you've got to get his ult off. If Geb is one of the number one characters that I will put down, try to get his ult off, and he just dies way too quickly. That is what I think keeps him down here in A+. I do find Geb to be one of the best characters in the game, and I almost always want to put him down, but he's not up here in this upper echelon with these people for those reasons. I think he dies too easily, and he's very ult specific. All right, let's talk about Humbats. Humbats, exact same thing. Humbats and Geb are extremely comparable to me. They do the same thing. They CC the enemy team. You want to get their ults off but they both die very quickly, and they have to be in the front line to get those ults off, but they both die very quickly. I think these two are very similar. I prefer Geb over Humbats due to the fact that he has higher protections and higher health, but they do the same thing very similarly. So I like to have these two very side by side together. Merlin. Well, guys, at the end, we are going to talk about some revisions. I already see a couple changes I want to make. We're going to talk about a few revisions at the very end. These are my first thoughts. At the end, we'll move a couple people, and I'll tell you why, okay? Rajan and Merlin. Let's talk about both these characters together. So, Rajan does more damage than Merlin. Merlin applies traits better than Rajan, because Merlin has a huge ultimate that just hits everything. And with Clarity, it hits everything twice. So, what is more effective in the current meta, in my opinion, is the argument between Rajan and Merlin. Because one of them is A+, and one of them is A. Do you want to just blow people up with Rajan, or do you want to apply your traits with Merlin? In a game like this, you want to apply your traits. So I tend to prefer Merlin over Rajan. If I see a Rajan, I'm very happy. Rajan does very well. But if I have a choice between the two, I'm almost always taking Merlin, because the wide AoE does a lot of damage, and it applies traits so well, which is the entire name of the game with mages right now. And all of these are legendary, so let's talk about the legendaries. First legendary I want to talk about is probably King Arthur. King Arthur's S+, for one simple reason. One simple reason. Clarity works on him. So, let's make this clear. King Arthur in a game where clarity does not exist is S. King Arthur is S in a game where clarity does not exist. Because he does very well. If he gets his ult off, he takes the highest health person on the enemy team and just kills them, which is incredible. That's awesome. Usually take out one of their best units on the other side of the field with his ultimate. But the simple fact of the matter is, clarity exists. And if clarity is in your game, King Arthur's S+, he ults 2 people, takes 2 people off the board within 3 seconds, and your team wins. If your Arthur gets a clarity ult and kills 2 people and your comp loses, there was a problem with your comp. King Arthur just eliminates usually the team's best 2 people. That is why King Arthur's best unit in the game right now, is because clarity works on him. All right, let's talk about Rama. I tend to find Rama to be A+, and Hu Yi to be A+. I tend to think these 2 characters are very comparable, because Hu Yi is one of my favorite characters to apply hits on. If I can apply things like Bonfire Bow or Furious Axe or Thunder or anything like that on Hu Yi, I tend to love having a Hu Yi. If I have things like Fire and Haste, I tend to prefer Rama because his ultimate does physical damage. So Fire on Rama is extremely powerful because it not only affects his auto attacks, it affects his ultimate as well. So Rama and Hu Yi, I loved almost the same. It just depends on what kind of comp I'm going. If I'm going a damagey comp, I want Rama. If I'm going attack speed, trait heavy, item heavy comp, I tend to want Hu Yi. But I do find them better than these characters down here because in the end game, applying those traits or applying that damage can turn your team from 4th place into 1st place really quickly. All right, I want to talk about Guan Yu. I tend to find Guan Yu also A+. He has a ultimate that hits the entire enemy team. He is untargetable during his ultimate. He applies traits extremely well. Again, let's talk about Silence and Void, for example. He applies them extremely well. So Zhong Kui tends to do well for all those reasons. So he's an easy one for me. Let's talk about Xing Shen. Xing Shen, I'm putting A. Xing Shen has high defenses, high health, and he has a good CC ultimate that basically makes half the enemy team stop doing anything for about 3 seconds. The problem with Zhong Kui is he takes the enemy team and moves them over there when your team is hitting here. So he is bad because a lot of the times he will sling the enemy team away from your abilities. Your Merlin will ult here, Xing Shen moves them there. Your Poseidon will ult here, your Xing Shen moves them there. That is the problem with Xing Shen. Everything else about him is great, but that's why I think he's A. He does great at everything, except a lot of the times you'll miss your abilities because he moves them away from them. Cerberus, B+. Cerberus does tons of damage. Cerberus applies a lot of traits very well. Cerberus also dies very quickly. You put Cerberus in the front line, you're lucky if he gets his full ult off. Once again, similar to someone like a Kali, he cannot auto attack during his ult. He's only ulting, which tends to take away from your DPS. So Cerberus tends to fall behind when it comes to the legendaries. Let's talk about Kukulkan. I think Kukulkan is S. I think Kukulkan applies almost every single trait in the game better than anybody. He knocks everyone on the enemy team up. He hits everybody with his ultimate. If you can get clarity or the hat that allows you to lucky hat that allows you to double ult, and you can get any kind of good trait on him, you don't even have to have 2, just 1. A silence, a void, an opportunist because they're knocked up and you're ulting a second time. Anything on a Kukulkan, he can wipe the enemy team himself. He will do 12,000 damage in those 2 ultimates if you do it right. Intelligence opportunist, bam, 12,000 damage. Enemy team, gone. Just like that. So Kukulkan does extremely well. But his counterpart is Agni, who does the same thing, just better. Who does the same thing almost, but more damage. Agni is the number 1 character who just kills the enemy team. You plop an Agni down and you go, alright, they lose. Typically how it tends to go. Agni does so much damage. The only problem with Agni is you got to make sure you keep him alive. If they dive your Agni, you have now lost what your entire comp is about. That can be a big problem for you. That's the only problem with Agni, is that he is one of the easiest characters to just die. He dies like that. Alright, talk about the final 2. Set and Pele. These 2 characters are the legendary assassins. Now, here I have a very probably controversial take on these 2. I find Pele better than Set because the only time I prefer Set is when I can get Divine Intervention on him. If I can't get Divine Intervention on Set, I tend to not want him, which in my opinion actually moves him down to B. I think Set without Divine Intervention is almost impossible to play because he dies way too quickly in the backline, and all his ultimate does is spawn a baby of him, and that does like half the damage. However, Set with Divine Intervention, Set babies can spawn other Set babies, which other pet characters such as Arachne, such as Allpwash, can't do. So if you get Divine Intervention on Set, the entire field quickly fills up with Set clones. But that is the only time I typically want to run Set. But however, set is extremely useful with items like Bonfire Bow. That is like second best set because his attack speed is 1.5. So let's get this clear real quick. The reason he's in B. Divine Intervention set is S. Bonfire Bow set is A. Regular set, any other build, is B. That's why he's B. He requires 2 very specific items in the entire game to make him good. Pele, I typically find to be B plus or A. She is the character, once again for me, that skirts this line between B plus and A. She skirts it so close. Her aggro drop is very good. Her damage is very good. And I tend to think between A and B plus, she tends to find herself in A. I think she tends to find herself in A because she does such high damage. If you get a Pele with the right items and right traits, she can decimate the enemy team and kill all of the mages and hunters extremely quickly. So guys, let's run through this and talk about any revisions I might want to make. First of all, I think I do want to move down into B. I think I want to move Ymir into B. All the reasons I talk about, he just doesn't apply things or do as much damage or anything as any of these characters. I think I also would like to move. I saw a few. I think all the A's are good. I think the A's are good. A pluses. I tend to be fine with all of this. These are characters I'm looking for. I want these characters. The S's. These are the characters that if I see, I put down almost at any time. Almost any time. Minotaur is one that is skirting this line for me. And I think I will move him into A+. I think Minotaur comes down. I think he is one of the best common units you can get, but I tend to prefer all of these if I can. And he is very similar to me like a Centurion. I want him, but I typically don't want him permanently. Also, I think I will move Carcadon to C. And Dryad to C. These 2 characters, if I see them, the only time I want them is if I know if I can get them 5-star. And that is not a good thing to think in a game like this. It's very hard to look at a Carcadon and a Dryad and say, well, they're good if they're 5-star. Every character is good if they're 5-star. So those guys are in C. The fact that the only way I want a Dryad or a Carcadon is if I can get them 5-star is so telling to me that they have to be in C. Guys, that's the tier list. Tell me what you agree or disagree in the comments down below. I want a discussion in the comments down below. I don't want you to just say, I disagree with your tier list. I want to hear where you would move people. I want to hear why you think this guy's great, why this character's not great. I want to hear all of it. I wanted you to tell me why you think they're great, why they're not, how they are best implemented, how you're using them incorrectly maybe. I want to hear all of this about this tier list in the comments down below. I want the comments down below to be a chat of comments because I will be commenting back with you guys. I will be chatting with you guys in the comments down below, and I want you to respond back to me, and let's hear what this community as a whole has to say about this game and its units and its leaders about what we can do to make it better, maybe nerfs, maybe buffs, all that stuff. How things can be changed to make this a better game to keep it alive and growing forward. Also, guys, tomorrow I will be posting a items and a traits tier list. So be sure to come back and do the same thing tomorrow. But guys, if you've enjoyed it, please be sure to like the video. Those likes help me out so much. And if you want to catch all my content in the future, be sure to subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Check me live on twitch.tv/TheWareGamer. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!